You are not here by accident. Something within you, deeper than habit, older than any deliberate choice you have ever made, guided you to this precise moment. And once you have received everything that is shared here, you will begin to understand exactly why. Perhaps lately you have been carrying a weight you cannot fully name, not the ordinary fatigue of a busy life, something quieter, a persistent, low-frequency sense that you are living at a fraction of your actual capacity, that the version of yourself showing up each day is somehow smaller than the version that exists inside you, waiting. That there is a level of clarity, of peace, of power that other people seem to access, and you have never quite found the door. But what if that feeling, that nagging, unrelenting, sometimes overwhelming sense of incompleteness, is not a sign that something is wrong with you? What if it is the most intelligent signal your inner world has ever sent you? What if it is your consciousness already recognizing that it is ready to expand beyond the floor it has been living on? Most people move through their entire lives without ever questioning the level from which they are perceiving reality. They react, they struggle, they achieve, and they wonder why the satisfaction never quite arrives. They mistake the noise of their own unexamined mind for the truth of existence. But not you. You are here. You chose this, and that already means something profound. Today, you are going to receive the complete map of the 7 levels of consciousness, the hidden architecture of your own mind, and the precise principles that will allow you to move deliberately and permanently into the levels where life is no longer something that happens to you, but something that flows through you. If even one of these 7 levels resonates with where you are right now, the shift that begins in the next few hours has the potential to alter the entire trajectory of your experience. Welcome. Let us begin. We exist beneath an illusion, the illusion that we all inhabit a single, shared, solid reality. But the deeper truth is that there are infinite worlds, infinite realities coexisting within the same space and time. The distinction between a life of suffering and a life of wholeness, between a life of exhausting struggle and a life of effortless flow, does not reside in external circumstances. It resides in the level of consciousness from which life is being perceived. Imagine that consciousness is a grand 7-story building. The overwhelming majority of humanity is born, exists, and departs from this world on the basement and first levels, the floors of survival. From those lower positions, the view is severely limited. The walls appear solid and immovable. Fear becomes the atmosphere you breathe, and you come to believe that life is an unrelenting battle against scarcity, against others, against circumstance itself. From those lower floors, it is genuinely impossible to perceive the landscapes of infinite possibility that are visible from the terraces of the upper levels. And yet, you have felt the longing to ascend. In your most lucid moments, you have sensed that there must be something more, a higher way of being, a different relationship with reality entirely. That longing is not wishful thinking. It is evidence that you are prepared to receive the hidden map of your own mind. This knowledge has been called forbidden, not because it is dangerous, but because it restores your sovereignty. It reveals that you are not permanently fixed on your current level. It reveals the staircase. This audiobook is that map. Together, we will journey through all 7 levels of consciousness, from the dark basement of the victim to the luminous penthouse of the creator. You will not learn to change the world. You will learn to change the floor from which you observe it. And by shifting your level of consciousness, the world you perceive will have no choice but to transform alongside you. The staircase has always been present, waiting for you to see it. Chapter 1. The first level. Victim consciousness. Ascension begins at the lowest point. Before we can climb toward the luminous upper floors of power and creation, we must first summon the courage to illuminate the basement where most of us have been residing. We must understand with unflinching honesty exactly where we stand. For the vast majority of human beings, the default level of consciousness, the starting point, is the dark, damp, and often strangely comfortable basement of the building of being. This is the first level, victim consciousness. The defining characteristic of this level is an inverted perception of reality. From this basement, life is perceived as something that occurs to us. We experience ourselves as passive objects, small vessels at the mercy of an ocean of uncontrollable external forces. Other people, the economy, the government, genetics, fate, misfortune. Life is the subject. We are the object. Victim consciousness is not a moral failure. It is a survival mechanism. It is the human ego's default programming, designed to shield us from the immense and often terrifying weight of our own power. So long as the source of our suffering is located out there, we remain temporarily protected from the difficult, sacred work of looking inward. To inhabit this level is to dwell in an invisible prison, a prison whose walls, though constructed from the intangible material of our own thoughts, feel as immovable as stone. And this prison is reinforced by 3 fundamental pillars. The first pillar is the blame mechanism, the outward projection of power. The mind, in order to escape the discomfort of assuming its own responsibility, projects the cause of its unhappiness outward. There is always an external party to hold accountable. If there is scarcity in our life, the cause belongs to the government, the economic system, an unjust employer, or parents who fail to provide adequate opportunity. If relationships collapse, the fault rests with former partners who were toxic, self-absorbed, or incapable of genuine love. If health deteriorates, the blame falls on genetics, environmental factors, or an inadequate medical system. The victim's mind is a masterful architect of narratives in which it perpetually occupies the role of the wronged and righteous innocent. In its internal story, it is the noble protagonist battling a cruel and corrupt world. This story, though painful, provides the ego with a deeply seductive reward: moral justification. By assigning blame, we generate a feeling of moral superiority. Our unhappiness transforms into a kind of credential, evidence of our goodness in an unjust world. The fundamental problem with blame is that it is an act of surrendering power. Every instance in which we blame something or someone external, we are declaring,
the cause of my experience exists outside of me. And if the cause is external, then the solution must be external as well. We become prisoners who wait and resent the very jailer they would need to set them free. We hand over the keys to our own lives to the exact forces we spend our energy opposing. The individual who begins to awaken learns to read blame as a compass. When the impulse to blame arises, it is an unmistakable signal of operating from the first level. It is an invitation to withdraw the projection, to stop directing attention at the external and instead ask, what belief within me has drawn this experience? How has my own inner state contributed to the creation of this situation? That question is the first and most difficult step out of the basement. The second pillar is the language of powerlessness, what we might call the complainer's prayer. Victim consciousness possesses its own dialect, its own way of speaking and thinking. And the most prominent word in that dialect is complaint. Complaint is not a simple description of a negative reality. It is a vibrational ritual. It is an affirmation. It is a prayer directed toward lack. Every time we complain, we are deploying our creative power, the power of the spoken word, to reinforce and solidify the very reality we claim we do not want. I am so exhausted. A directive for the body to generate more fatigue. This is impossible. A decree that seals the door against any creative resolution. I will never find the right person. A prophecy the subconscious will diligently fulfill. Complaining is also a mode of social connection at the basement level. People in the victim state frequently gather to form what might be called complaint communities, spaces where they bond over shared grievances, compete for the title of greatest sufferer, and validate one another's helplessness. The exchange provides a sense of belonging. I am not alone in my pain. But it is a bond built on shared wounds,
not shared strength. At the neurological level, chronic complaining is an act of self-defeating neuroplasticity. Every repeated complaint reinforces the neural pathways of pessimism and powerlessness. We literally sculpt a brain that has become expert at detecting problems, cataloging flaws, and dismissing solutions. We become elite athletes of negativity. The awakening individual learns to become a guardian of language. He understands that every sentence uttered is a seed, and he chooses to stop planting the weeds of complaint in the garden of his mind. This is not toxic positivity. It is not a denial of reality. It is the choice to speak about challenges from a position of agency rather than helplessness. The third pillar is the emotional climate of powerlessness, apathy, and resentment. The atmosphere of the victim's basement is governed by two intertwined states, apathy and resentment. Apathy is the emotion of surrender. It is the conviction that nothing I do produces any meaningful result. It is the learned helplessness that accumulates after repeated attempts to alter external reality by force, without comprehending the deeper laws at work. Apathy is the natural consequence of believing that power resides somewhere outside of you. Resentment is the opposite face of the same coin. It is the energy of anger that has been neither expressed nor transformed. It is the accumulated bitterness that forms when we believe the world owes us something and refuses to deliver. It is the slow poison generated by the victim's narrative. And it is a biochemical reality, a state of chronic internal stress that gradually erodes the body from within. But why would anyone choose to inhabit such a corrosive emotional climate? Because, as improbable as it may seem, the victim state carries a hidden reward. It offers a secondary benefit that the ego finds irresistible: complete absolution from the terrifying responsibility of one's own creative power. To be the author of your own life is a liberating concept, but it is also an immense weight. It means there are no excuses. It means the quality of your existence depends entirely on the quality of your own consciousness. For an ego that fears failure above all else, this responsibility is overwhelming. The victim role provides the perfect alibi. Victim consciousness is not weakness. It is a hiding place. It is where the soul conceals itself from the immense power and immense responsibility of its own nature. And yet, even within the darkest cell, light sometimes filters through the cracks. These fractures are moments of cognitive dissonance, instances when the victim's narrative fails to explain reality in a satisfying way. Perhaps we observe someone who began from far more difficult circumstances and yet created a life of genuine joy. Perhaps we encounter an unexpected act of generosity from someone we anticipated nothing from. Or perhaps, and this is the most common catalyst, the suffering itself becomes so unbearable that it ruptures its own container. The pain of remaining in the cell finally exceeds the fear of the unknown beyond it. This is the moment of reaching the bottom. And it is not a tragedy. It is an act of grace. It is the soul declaring with thunderous clarity, there must be another way. The instant that question arises, the first fracture appears in the prison wall. And through that fracture, a new possibility enters. The possibility that perhaps, just perhaps, the power was never outside at all. The first step out of the victim's basement is not a complex technique or a mystical ritual. It is a simple, devastating, liberating choice: to assume 100% responsibility for one's life experience. Not blame directed inward, not the illusion of controlling all external events, but something far more precise: the recognition of your ability to respond. The reclamation of your sovereign power to choose your perception, your interpretation, and your response to any circumstance that life places before you. The prisoner in the victim state believes that his liberation depends on the jailer choosing to open the door. The individual taking the first step toward freedom realizes that his liberation depends solely on his own inner decision. This shift is immediately reflected in the questions we ask. The victim asks, "Why is this happening to me?" A question designed to locate blame and deepen powerlessness. Awakening Creator asks, "For what purpose is this happening? What is this situation inviting me to learn?" A question designed to reclaim power and seek the lesson within the experience. To close this first chapter, the practice that catalyzes this transition is simple but demanding. Take your journal and list every area of your life in which you feel like a victim, every primary complaint. For each one, with the kind of honest courage that changes lives, identify at least one way in which you have contributed to creating or allowing that situation. Not to assign yourself guilt, but to locate the lever. Because the moment you identify your contribution, you have found the only point in the entire system over which you have absolute control: yourself. And that is the only point from which genuine change has ever been made. If the map of consciousness that is unfolding before you is already shifting something in the way you see your life, leave the number 444 in the comments below. The number of alignment, the signal that your mind is beginning to recognize the architecture of its own power. Let this community witness the moment you chose to pick up the key. Chapter 2. The Second Level. The Consciousness of Struggle. It is essential to understand from the outset that this second level is not an error. It is not a setback. It is a necessary and monumental evolution, the first great awakening of the human spirit. At this level, the fundamental perception of reality is reversed in the most significant way possible. Life ceases to be something that happens to you and becomes something you can make happen. You stop being the effect and begin to act as the cause. You remove the posture of the victim and put on the warrior's armor. The warrior archetype is the animating force of this level of consciousness. It is a stage of extraordinary power and remarkable achievement in the external world. It is the level from which empires are constructed, Olympic performances are delivered, and the summits of organizations are reached. It is the consciousness that propels humanity to surpass its perceived limits and claim what once appeared impossible. From the warrior's perspective, the world is no longer a place of random chaos and arbitrary injustice. It transforms into a battlefield, a vast strategic arena populated by challenges and opportunities. Obstacles are no longer interpreted as punishments of fate, but as adversaries to be defeated. Goals are no longer distant dreams, but territories to be conquered. This new perception is enormously empowering. The helplessness of the victim is displaced by a commanding sense of agency. The warrior understands that through discipline and sustained effort, he can impose his will upon matter and sculpt his own destiny. If the victim's instrument was complaint, the warrior's instrument is willpower. At this level, the muscle of discipline is discovered and deliberately developed. The warrior learns to govern his impulses, to overcome inertia, to push consistently beyond discomfort. No pain, no gain becomes not merely a phrase, but a governing philosophy. He learns to rise early, even when every cell in his body demands rest. He learns to make the difficult call, even when fear of rejection pulses through him. He learns to refuse the immediate reward so he can affirm the long-term vision. The warrior's emotional landscape is intense and charged with kinetic energy. The dominant emotion driving him is ambition, the fire of desire to expand, to accomplish, to win, to demonstrate his capacity. It is a proactive force that lifts him out of passivity and launches him into active engagement with the world. The shadow emotion at this level is no longer the victim's self-pity, but frustration and anger. When the world fails to yield to his will, the warrior does not lament. He ignites. He experiences a surge of aggressive force and deploys it as fuel, redoubling his efforts, attacking the problem with greater intensity. We should not diminish the genuine achievements of this consciousness. The warrior is the hero archetype of our civilization. The individuals who operate from this state are frequently the pillars of society, the entrepreneurs who generate opportunity, the athletes who elevate the standards of human performance, the leaders who construct lasting institutions. They have mastered significant dimensions of the material world. From the perspective of the basement, the second floor resembles a palace. And yet, despite all of these achievements, struggle consciousness is not the destination. It is a stage. Because this level, though it may appear as a palace from below, is in reality a prison. A golden prison, perhaps, but a prison nonetheless. The shadow of the warrior is his fundamental limitation. His worldview remains profoundly dualistic. He continues to inhabit a universe structured as me against the world. His peace depends entirely on victory. He can only allow himself to rest once the battle has been won, the target reached. But since life delivers an uninterrupted sequence of challenges, his peace is perpetually temporary, fragile, always shadowed by the anxiety of the next conflict. His sense of worth is completely fused with his performance. He is his results. If he wins, he is a winner. If he fails, he is a failure. His self-regard is not intrinsic. It is a direct reflection of his external output. He inhabits a state of relentless pressure to prove his value again and again and again. His mode of operating is struggle itself. He believes the only legitimate path to creation runs through effort, tension, and forceful control. He has not yet encountered the intelligence of surrender, of collaboration with something larger than his individual will, of what becomes available when striving gives way to flow. His existence is a perpetual war, and regardless of how glorious that war may be, it is always eventually exhausting. Living in the consciousness of struggle is living in a state of chronic activation of the sympathetic nervous system. It is the fight or flight response elevated to a lifestyle. The warrior's inner orchestra plays a constant fanfare of adrenaline and cortisol, a composition designed by nature for short, urgent survival moments, but devastating when it becomes the permanent soundtrack of a life. The physical consequences are predictable: chronic exhaustion, burnout, what we might name the sacred disease of the warrior. His immune system gradually weakens. His capacity for deep sleep diminishes. He exists in a painful paradox, perpetually wired by stress, yet profoundly depleted. Mentally, Chronic stress redirects neurological resources from the prefrontal cortex, the site of long-term vision and creative thought, toward the amygdala, the primitive survival brain. The warrior's thinking becomes rigid, reactive, short-term. He becomes a specialist in winning individual battles while steadily losing the larger war. The great tragedy of the warrior emerges after decades of struggle and accomplishment. He reaches the summit of the mountain he set out to conquer, surveys the landscape he has claimed, and discovers a deep, bewildering emptiness. He has won the external game, but severed the connection to his own soul. He realizes the peace he sought was never located at the mountaintop. It resided in the capacity to be genuinely present along the journey, something he never permitted himself. And it is precisely in this moment of existential fracture, this hollow victory, that the warrior is offered a new choice. He can identify a higher mountain, certain that the next conquest will finally deliver the peace this one did not. This is the path of escalating suffering. Or he can do something that demands more genuine courage than any battle he has ever entered. He can set down his weapons. He can sit on the summit of everything he has built, survey his dented armor, feel the weight of his exhaustion, and allow himself to ask the question that changes the direction of everything. What if there is another way? This is the awakening of the warrior, the recognition that the true adversary was never external. The real battle was always internal. And the actual victory is not the conquest of the world. It is the making of peace with oneself. The practice that opens this transition is not a new strategy or an enhanced performance system. It is an audit. The wise warrior takes his journal, not to document battle plans, but to examine where he has been applying disproportionate force. Where does life feel like rowing against the current rather than moving with it? Which conflicts is he sustaining out of habit, pride, or the compulsion to be right? Conflicts that no longer serve any genuine purpose. This honest self-observation reveals the precise points where energy is hemorrhaging into futile struggle. And once identified, the warrior does not respond in his default way with redoubled force. He searches for the third path. He begins asking questions that belong to a higher level of consciousness. Not, how do I defeat this obstacle? But, what if this obstacle is not an enemy to overpower, but a doorway inviting me toward a more intelligent route, one I had not yet perceived? The consciousness of struggle. Chapter 3. The third level. Achiever consciousness. This is the level of consciousness that modern civilization has enshrined as the pinnacle of human success. If the victim is the pawn and the warrior is the rook, the achiever is the master player who moves every piece on the board with precision, intention, and strategic intelligence. The transition from the second to the third level is a transition from force to intelligence, from reaction to deliberate creation. Consciousness ceases to perceive the world as a battlefield to be subdued by sheer power, and begins instead to see it as a system, one that can be comprehended, organized, and optimized to produce specific, predictable results. The achiever is an architect. His power resides in his capacity to design a future and then construct it with remarkable precision and effectiveness. This operational state is supported by three fundamental pillars. The first pillar is the power of the goal, the future as a destination. The warrior fought by instinct. The achiever acts with deliberate purpose. The central instrument of the third level is the goal itself. Achiever consciousness grasps a fundamental principle of the human mind. The subconscious operates as a target-seeking mechanism. Like a guided missile, it requires a clear objective to mobilize its vast internal resources. Without a defined target, energy disperses in all directions. With a clear target, that same energy converges into a laser beam of focused capability. At this level, people discover and master the art and science of goal setting. They learn to be specific, to measure their progress, to establish clear timelines. They transform the vague longings of the victim and the raw ambitions of the warrior into precise, actionable plans. This is often the level at which many individuals first encounter the principles of manifestation, but they tend to apply them from an entirely mechanical perspective. They use affirmations and visualization not as practices of inner alignment, but as mental programming tools aimed at external achievement. The what, the external goal, remains more significant to them than the who, the person they are becoming through the process. The second pillar is the currency of time and productivity, the optimization of doing. If the goal is the destination, the vehicle for reaching it is productivity. The achiever is a master of time and energy management, understanding intuitively that these are his most precious resources and becoming deeply committed to extracting maximum value from both. This is the world of efficiency literature, of the Pareto principle and prioritization frameworks, of systems and leverage, and the elimination of distraction. Unlike the warrior, who believes the only solution is to work with greater force, the achiever seeks always to work with greater intelligence. His life becomes an engineering project. Every hour carries a designated purpose. Every action connects to a larger outcome. Every result is tracked and measured. The third pillar, and perhaps the most revealing, is the engine of external validation, the self defined as an achievement. Here we arrive at the core. The fuel that powers the achiever's engine at its most fundamental level is a wound. The belief that he is not sufficient simply as he is. His relentless pursuit of achievement is, beneath all its brilliance and surface-level confidence, a search for validation. Every goal reached, every accolade accumulated, every number added to his financial account is an attempt to silence the internal voice of inadequacy. His scorecard is entirely external. The title on his business card, the address of his residence, the engagement on his social profiles, the admiration visible in the eyes of those around him. He lives, fundamentally, for the applause. We should not condemn this level. Achiever consciousness is among the most potent driving forces behind human civilization's progress. The individuals who inhabit this state are the architects of our cities, the generators of scientific breakthroughs, the builders of enterprises that provide livelihoods for millions. They have learned to engage successfully with the material world, and, by its own rules, they have prevailed. And yet, despite all of its external radiance, the third level is not the destination. Because the palace the achiever has constructed is, in reality, a gilded cage. It is a prison so exquisitely decorated, so deeply admired by those on the floors below, that its inhabitant frequently fails to perceive that he is confined. The shadow of achiever consciousness is subtle but profoundly corrosive. The first bar of the cage is the when-then trap. The achiever inhabits perpetual residence in the future. His inner peace is always conditional, always dependent on the next accomplishment. I will be genuinely content when I receive the promotion. I will permit myself to rest when I hit the revenue target. I will begin enjoying my life when I retire. But when the goal is finally reached, the relief is brief and fragile, a fleeting exhale before the anxiety of the next objective sets in. He is caught on the hedonic treadmill, requiring increasingly significant achievements to produce the same emotional response. Satisfaction is never available here in the present. It always resides on the next summit. The second bar is the fear of stillness. The achiever has become addicted to doing. His entire sense of identity depends on continuous motion. Rest is not experienced as restoration, but as a symptom of weakness, a waste of irreplaceable time, a potential threat to his status. Silence terrifies him, because within silence he might be forced to encounter the void that his accomplishments have been constructed to conceal. This fear of stillness is the precise formula for the most sophisticated form of exhaustion, the depletion not of the body, but of the soul itself. The third and heaviest bar of the cage is the loss of the self. The achiever has identified so completely with his roles and his results that he has lost contact with his essential nature. He is no longer a human being. He is a CEO, a physician, an elite performer. If you remove his title, his function, his catalog of achievements, he often discovers that he has no clear sense of what remains. He has surrendered the wholeness of his being on the altar of his function. The soul, which longs for infinite expansion and authentic expression, begins eventually to feel claustrophobic within even the most gilded of enclosures. And it is precisely at this peak of worldly success that the deepest crisis frequently emerges. This awakening is typically catalyzed by one of three life events. The first is the crisis of hollow success, the moment the achiever reaches the great goal he believed would deliver lasting happiness, and finds instead a chilling emptiness. The second is the collapse from exhaustion, the moment the body, treated for years as a mere instrument of ambition, simply refuses to continue and delivers its verdict through illness, burnout, or complete depletion. The third is the arrival of an uncontrollable external force, an economic collapse, a betrayal, a loss, that shatters the achiever's illusion of control and forces him to seek a form of security that no external accomplishment can provide. When any of these events occur, the cracks in the gilded cage become a fracture. And through that fracture, the achiever glimpses for the first time the possibility of a different kind of freedom entirely. The awakening of the achiever initiates a profound reorientation. The first and most consequential shift is from an identity rooted in doing to one anchored in being. The individual, ready to transcend the third level, begins the difficult but liberating work of separating his sense of worth from his external results. He learns to witness his successes and failures not as verdicts on who he is, but as passing experiences moving through a consciousness that is far larger than any of them. The second shift is from an external scorecard to an internal compass. The achiever stops measuring the value of his days by tasks completed or approval received. A new set of questions begins to govern what constitutes a meaningful day. Was I authentic? Did I act in alignment with what I genuinely believe? Did I experience genuine peace? Did I express care? Was I fully present? He begins to recognize that the quality of his inner state is the only honest measure of a life well lived. The third shift transforms goals from destinations into vehicles. Goals are no longer the location where fulfillment resides. They become the medium through which growth and authentic expression occur. The destination is no longer the point. The process, the expansion that happens along the way, becomes the treasure. The practice that opens this transition is the why audit. For each significant goal currently in motion, the awakening achiever asks with unflinching honesty, what is the actual motivation behind this pursuit? Am I chasing this to prove my value to others? To fill an interior void? Or am I pursuing it because it represents an authentic expression of something I genuinely care about? Because the process itself generates meaning and aligns with something deeper than approval? If the answer points toward the ego, the goal need not be abandoned, but it must be consciously reframed, aligned with service, connected to growth rather than validation. Achiever consciousness represents the highest level the ego as a separate entity can reach through its own force. It is a stage of immense creative power, but its ultimate lesson is this: true mastery is not constructing the most magnificent gilded cage. It is discovering that the door of the cage has always been open, and the only approval that ever truly mattered was your own. Chapter 4. The Fourth Level. The Consciousness of Intention. The achiever, standing on the summit of his mountain of external accomplishments, begins to sense the hollow quality of his victory. He has won the game the world defined for him, and feels, quietly, that he has lost contact with his own soul. In that sacred crisis, in that divine dissatisfaction, he makes the most consequential pivot of his entire journey. He stops directing his gaze outward, searching for the next trophy. For the first time, he turns his attention inward, searching for meaning. This is the great turning point, the crossing of the equator, the passage from the hemisphere of survival to the hemisphere of conscious creation. It is the moment we cease to be an ego attempting to conquer the world and begin to be a soul seeking to express itself within it. Welcome to the fourth level, the consciousness of intention. In the first three levels, though the individual's power grows considerably, from the helplessness of the victim through the force of the warrior to the strategy of the achiever, the foundational premise remains unchanged. We inhabit an external world that is solid and real, and our task is to react to it, resist it, or manipulate it as skillfully as possible. At the fourth level, this premise dissolves entirely. The revelation of the law of reflection occurs, the recognition that the external world is a mirror, a projection of our inner state. And with this recognition, the entire game is transformed. It is no longer about extracting things from the world. It is about emanating a quality of being from within. The question shifts from what can I obtain to who do I choose to become? The language of the third level was the language of goals. A goal is an external destination on the map of the material world, a place the ego wishes to reach in order to finally feel validated and at peace. The language of the fourth level is the language of intention, and an intention is radically different. It is not an external destination. It is a quality of being that the soul chooses to embody in the present moment. A goal is, I want to earn $1 million. An intention is, I choose to be a channel of abundance and genuine value, and to inhabit a state of financial freedom. A goal is, I want to find a partner. An intention is, I choose to embody self-love and wholeness, and to attract a relationship that mirrors that inner harmony back to me. The goal is conditional and future-oriented. The intention is unconditional and anchored in the now. The goal locates happiness in the result. The intention discovers it in the process itself. A master intention is constructed from three precise elements: clarity, emotion, and faith. Clarity is the what. An intention must be crystalline. The universe does not respond to ambiguous signals. The initiate at the fourth level takes time, in genuine stillness, in the quiet of genuine contemplation, to distill the longing of his soul into a clear declaration. What quality of being, if fully embodied, would transform my experience of life? This is not an exercise of willpower. It is an exercise of listening. It is quieting the mind sufficiently to hear the whisper of one's own authentic nature. Emotion is the why. Goals at the third level are frequently driven by the emotions of the ego, the fear of scarcity, the compulsion for approval, desire to outperform others. This is a low-frequency fuel that, though it can generate results, always leads eventually to depletion. An intention at the fourth level is powered by the emotions of the soul. The why behind the intention must be an expansive feeling: love, joy, creativity, service, genuine growth. The initiate examines his intention and keeps asking why until he arrives at the deepest root emotion. He discovers that the true intention is rarely the surface desire, The true intention is the feeling state that the surface desire is attempting to reach. And when he aligns his intention with that soul-level emotion, he connects it to an inexhaustible source of energy. Faith is the how, or more precisely, the willingness to release it. This is the quantum leap that distinguishes the achiever from the conscious creator. The achiever at the third level is consumed by the how. He constructs meticulous action plans and clings to them with white-knuckled control. His security resides in his plan. The creator at the fourth level understands that the how is not his domain. It belongs to the infinite intelligence of the universe. His task is to define the what with clarity and the why with genuine emotional depth, and then to release the how with radical faith. This surrender is not passivity. It is the most sophisticated act of power available at this level. It is the recognition that the conscious mind, with its inherently limited vision, cannot conceive of the miraculous and synchronistic pathways that a larger intelligence can arrange. When a person begins operating from this fourth level, the mirror of reality begins reflecting a new quality, a quality that feels almost magical. Events cease to appear random. The world begins to communicate. Synchronicities arrive. Synchronicity, a term first articulated by the psychologist Carl Jung, is a meaningful coincidence. The moment when an external event aligns precisely and seemingly impossibly with an inner state. You think of someone you have not spoken to in years, and the phone rings. You need a specific answer, and the exact paragraph appears on the page you open at random. You set the intention to find a mentor, and the following day you find yourself seated beside precisely the right person. For consciousness dwelling in the lower levels, such events are dismissed as coincidence. For the initiate at the fourth level, they are confirmation. They are the universe's language, evidence that it has received the signal and is organizing itself in response. The workshop of the awakened creator centers on a practice called the Intentionality Journal. Each morning, rather than generating a list of tasks to accomplish, the initiate asks a single foundational question. Who do I choose to be today? The answer is not a role or a function. It is a quality. Today I choose to be an embodiment of peace. Today my intention is to be a channel for genuine creativity. Today, I choose to perceive the wholeness in every person I encounter. He writes this intention and then spends several minutes feeling its presence in his body, sensing what a day inhabited from that quality would actually look and feel like. He is not planning a series of actions. He is establishing a state of being, trusting that the aligned actions will arise naturally from that foundation. The consciousness of intention is the great portal. It is the moment you reclaim your power in the only location where it has ever actually existed, the present moment. When the map of these four levels begins to reorganize something real within you, when you begin to feel the difference between living from a goal and living from an intention, leave the number 111 in the comments. In many wisdom traditions, 111 marks the moment of new beginnings, the precise instant when thought and inner reality begin to align. Let this community witness the moment your inner compass awakened. Chapter 5. The Fifth Level. The Consciousness of Flow. To understand the transformation this level represents, consider life as a powerful river, the current of universal intelligence moving with its own immutable wisdom toward the ocean of wholeness. On the first level, the victim is drowning in the river, battered by currents he cannot comprehend, terrified by the rocks he cannot avoid. On the second level, the warrior climbs into a small vessel and rows with every ounce of force he possesses against the current, attempting to impose his own direction. His experience is heroic but exhausting and ultimately unsustainable. On the third level, the achiever builds a motorboat. He applies strategy and technology to navigate the river, frequently in a straight line, convinced he has mastered the current. He burns enormous quantities of fuel. He reaches many destinations, but he rarely discovers true peace within the journey. On the fourth level, that of intention, the traveler finally silences the engine. He has set his destination. He is beginning to respect the river's current and trust its intelligence. On the fifth level, the traveler does something far more radical. He releases the oars. He stands upright in his vessel, balanced and calm, and learns to work with a single subtle instrument, a small, responsive rudder. That rudder is his intuition. He no longer attempts to force his path. Instead, he uses the refined, delicate guidance of his inner compass to navigate the powerful current, allowing the immense force of life itself to carry him effortlessly toward his destination. This is the state of flow. The key word at this level is surrender. Our minds, conditioned by the training of the lower levels, instinctively equate surrender with defeat, with passivity, with failure. But the surrender of the fifth level is not the passive capitulation of the victim who has simply given up. It is an active, conscious, supremely intelligent surrender. It is what the Taoist tradition calls Wu Wei, effortless action, or active non-action. This means ceasing to be the originator of action and becoming instead the channel through which action moves. It is radical trust, born from the deep recognition that the river of life is intelligent and fundamentally benevolent. It is the end of the ego's arrogance, the belief that it is a separate entity responsible for planning and controlling every dimension of its existence. It is the humility of recognizing that we are part of an immensely larger intelligence, and that by aligning with its flow, we access a power and wisdom that the rational mind could never independently conceive. And it is the end of resistance. All human suffering, without exception, originates from resistance to what is. When we argue with the present moment, when we demand that reality conform to our preferences, we generate friction that manifests as stress, anxiety, and physical tension. The master of flow does not resist the present. He meets it completely, not with resignation, but with the wisdom of understanding that every stretch of the river, even its most challenging passages, is a necessary portion of the journey toward the destination. The psychologist Mihai Csikszentmihalyi dedicated decades to studying this state, which he named flow experience. He described it as a condition of total immersion in an activity in which the sense of a separate self temporarily dissolves, time distorts, and action and consciousness merge. At the fifth level of consciousness, flow ceases to be an occasional, accidental experience during a specific activity. It becomes the fundamental quality of life itself. Intuition at this level is no longer an occasional hunch. It becomes a constant bodily knowing, the felt sense of which decision moves with the current and which moves against it. You stop making choices exclusively through analytical weighing of pros and cons. You begin navigating through the wisdom of an inner instrument that is considerably more sophisticated than the logical mind alone. Synchronicities, which appeared as remarkable glimpses at the fourth level, become ordinary, the signs on the riverbank confirming that you are moving in the right direction. The great paradox of this level is this: the more desperately we attempt to control life, the more control escapes us. When we force outcomes, when we resist the natural rhythms of events, we fall out of alignment with the very current that could carry us where we want to go. True sovereignty is not born from forcing the river to follow our chosen path. It is born from becoming so skilled a navigator that we can use the river's own momentum and be carried by paths that are frequently more beautiful and efficient than anything we could have planned. The morning practice of the Master of Flow is not a battle plan. It is an act of alignment. His internal prayer each morning becomes a version of, "Today, I surrender to the intelligence that moves through all things. Use me as a channel for your purpose. Show me the path of least resistance. I am open and willing to follow wherever genuine alignment leads." This consecration shifts the entire energy of the day. It is no longer a day of combat. It is a day of co-creation. Throughout the day, the Master employs the body as a compass. Faced with any decision, he pauses and asks, not what does my mind calculate, but what does this feel like in my body? Does it feel light, open, expansive, like a current flowing towards something real? Or does it feel heavy, contracted, forced, like pushing against the river? He has learned, through sustained practice, to trust the wisdom encoded in these physical sensations more than the often deceptive arguments of the ego's preferences. And perhaps most importantly, the Master of Flow has become a skilled practitioner of the inspired no. Living in flow is not passive agreement with everything life presents. It is precisely the opposite. It is the art of saying no to nearly everything in order to preserve the energy and attention required to say a full, resonant, embodied yes to the rare opportunities that are genuinely aligned. He has become a careful guardian of his energy. Each yes given to a forced or misaligned opportunity costs him currency he cannot recover. And so he waits, calmly, without anxiety, for the opportunities that will feel in every cell of his body like an absolute and unconditional yes. The consciousness of flow is the dissolution of the war between the individual self and the universe. It is the discovery that you are not a solitary navigator fighting an indifferent ocean. You are a conscious expression of the current itself. Chapter 6. The Sixth Level. The Consciousness of Unity. To enter this territory, we must first dismantle the most foundational illusion of all, the root belief upon which our entire civilization and the entirety of human suffering have been constructed: the illusion of separation. From the moment of birth, we are conditioned to define ourselves through our boundaries. This is my body, and that is yours. I exist here, and the world exists out there. My family, my tribe, my beliefs, and then the others. Our language, our science, and our psychology are built entirely upon the premise that we are encapsulated egos, isolated consciousnesses navigating as solitary units through a universe that is fundamentally alien to us. From this perception of separation, every fear is born: the fear of loneliness, the fear of death, the fear of scarcity, the fear of the other. Conflict, competition, and the persistent feeling of being a fragile and insignificant fragment within a vast, indifferent cosmos. All of it arises from this single root illusion. The great revelation of the sixth level of consciousness is that this separation is an illusion, an extraordinarily convincing perceptual construction, but an illusion nonetheless. The deeper truth, which has been known by the world's mystics and sages across every tradition and every era, is this: at the most fundamental level of reality, separation does not exist. Everything within the universe is intimately, inextricably, and eternally interconnected. You are not a drop contained within the ocean. You are the entire ocean, experiencing itself through the focal point of a single drop. This understanding, which for millennia was the exclusive territory of mystical experience, now finds remarkable confirmation in the discoveries of contemporary science. Cosmology tells us that approximately 13.8 billion years ago, every particle that composes your body, every galaxy, every star, every atom of everything that exists, was unified within a single point of inconceivable density. The Big Bang was not an explosion occurring in a pre-existing space. It was the expansion of space itself from that point of primordial unity. This means that every particle of your being shares a common origin with the most distant star visible from Earth. In the most literal sense of the language, you are made of the same substance as the cosmos. The experience of separation is an artifact of time and scale, not an ultimate reality. Biology reveals that we are not isolated entities, but walking ecosystems. Our bodies harbor trillions of microorganisms without which fundamental physiological processes would be impossible. The carbon dioxide you exhale is the precise nourishment that sustains plant life. The oxygen released by those plants is the sustenance that maintains your own. The boundary between your being and the surrounding atmosphere has no genuine solidity. You are a temporary and dynamic knot within the infinite network of the biosphere. And quantum physics offers perhaps the most disconcerting confirmation of all. The phenomenon of quantum entanglement, which Einstein famously described as spooky action at a distance, demonstrates that particles which were once connected remain linked regardless of the distance between them. Measuring a property of one particle instantaneously determines the corresponding property of its partner, even if separated by the breadth of the universe. This violates every classical assumption about space, time, and the independence of objects. And it points toward a truth that the rational mind struggles to accommodate: that at the deepest level accessible to scientific investigation, the entire universe functions as a single, interconnected system. For the human being, this understanding rarely arrives as an intellectual proposition. It arrives as a series of direct experiences, awakenings that dissolve, even briefly, the perceived boundaries of the self. The first awakening is often the most accessible: unity with the natural world. It occurs in those moments of profound contact with the living earth, when standing breathless before the scale of a mountain range, or sitting in genuine silence beside the ocean and feeling the breath synchronize with the rhythm of the waves. In those instants, the ego's incessant commentary ceases. The sense of being a separate observer looking at nature dissolves. There is only being. You no longer feel that you are visiting nature. You recognize unmistakably that you are nature, temporarily concentrated into a particular focal point of awareness. The second awakening is the opening of genuine compassion, unity with humanity. In the lower levels of consciousness, our relationship with others is structured by duality: friend or adversary, us or them, source of pleasure or source of threat. At the sixth level, something shifts in how we perceive the presence of another person, even someone with whom we experience deep conflict. Looking into their eyes, beneath the surface features of their particular personality and story, we begin to recognize the same quality of awareness that we find within ourselves. Their narrative, their wounds, their beliefs may differ entirely from ours. But the consciousness that witnesses their life, the silent, experiencing awareness behind their eyes, is identical in nature to the one behind our own. From this recognition, genuine judgment becomes impossible, not as a moral performance or spiritual discipline, simply as a natural consequence of perception. How could we harbor contempt for another if, at their deepest level, they are us in a different form? Irritation softens into compassion. Conflict transforms into an opportunity for recognition. This is the actual meaning of the word namaste. The consciousness in me acknowledges the consciousness in you. You begin to understand at a visceral, cellular level that causing harm to another is, in any meaningful sense, a form of self-harm. The third awakening is the mystical opening, unity with the Source itself. It is the full and temporary dissolution of the sense of a separate self. It is the moment when the drop of water, after its long and individual journey, returns to the ocean and recognizes that it was never genuinely separate from it. In this state, there is no longer a you who experiences the universe. There is only the universe, experiencing itself through and as what you are. Pure consciousness without form or attribute. The end of all searching, because what you have been seeking is revealed as what you have always already been. This experience may be fleeting, a glimpse of eternity, a moment of recognition that lasts seconds. But once it has been lived, even once, it permanently alters the architecture of the self. The belief in fundamental separation is revealed, with quiet humor, as the great cosmic misunderstanding. And even when you return to inhabiting your personal identity, you carry within it a new lightness, the silent certainty that your true nature is as vast as the cosmos from which it arose. Even at this elevated level, however, the ego demonstrates its extraordinary capacity for survival. The trap of the spiritual ego awaits. This is the part of us that takes the experience of unity and converts it into a new and more sophisticated identity, a badge of attainment. The inner voice that whispers, "Now I understand what others do not. I have accessed a level that most people cannot reach." This is perhaps the subtlest and most dangerous veil of all, precisely because it is woven from the very light of genuine insight. The spiritual ego can generate a refined condescension toward those who remain in the lower levels. It can create an attachment to elevated states of experience, the seeker becoming addicted to mystical highs and judging his spiritual progress by the frequency of peak experiences rather than by the quality of his ordinary presence. And in its most corrosive form, it produces spiritual bypassing, the deployment of absolute truth as a means of avoiding the relative responsibilities of human life. The genuine sign that the consciousness of unity has been integrated is not the capacity to generate extraordinary experiences. It is an increase in humility, an expansion of compassion, a quieter, more persistent quality of service. It is the dissolution of personal importance within the vast, inexhaustible mystery of being. The central practice of this level is the meditation of dissolving boundaries. The mystic follows the journey of his own breath with full attention, recognizing on the inhalation that he is drawing the outside world into himself, and on the exhalation that he is releasing himself back into the outside world. In the simple, continuous dance of breathing, the absolute boundary between inner and outer dissolves moment by moment. He then extends this awareness. Sitting with his back against a tree, he practices feeling the roots extending into the same earth that sustains the tree, his spine as still and solid as the trunk, his arms reaching like branches toward the light. The tree and he are not two separate things. They are two expressions of the same upward movement, the same life. To cultivate the lens of compassion as a perception rather than an effort, the master practices what might be called the "just like me" recognition. When a person generates irritation or harsh judgment within him, he pauses, and in the silence of his awareness, he moves through a series of recognitions. Just like me, this person is seeking happiness. Just like me, this person has experienced suffering and loss. Just like me, this person is doing the very best they can from the level of consciousness available to them in this moment. This simple, repeated act of recognition dismantles the illusion of the other as adversary and opens the heart to the space where genuine healing becomes not only possible, but, over time, inevitable. The consciousness of unity is the great homecoming, the end of essential loneliness. The discovery that love is not a thing to be given or received. It is the very fabric from which existence is made. Chapter 7. The Seventh Level. The Consciousness of Being. What is the nature of this awareness that has been witnessing the entire journey? To address this question, we must take the final step, a step that is not a movement forward, but a dissolution toward the center. Not an ascent, but a return to the origin. Welcome to the seventh and final level, the level that is simultaneously the foundation of all the others and their ultimate culmination. Welcome to the consciousness of being. Throughout this entire journey, our focus has rested on the contents of consciousness: thoughts, emotions, beliefs, perceptions. We have learned to observe them, to transform them, to align them with greater and greater precision. But now we are going to withdraw attention from the content entirely and place it on the container. We are going to explore the nature of consciousness itself. This is the inquiry of self-discovery. The question that the sages of every tradition have carried at the center of their practice: who am I? Are we our body? Consider it honestly. You say, my body, in precisely the same way you might say, my car or my house. There is an awareness that possesses and observes the body. The body changes constantly. It ages, it heals, it transforms. But the consciousness that witnesses these changes has remained throughout your entire life essentially constant. The body cannot be what you are. You are the awareness that inhabits and experiences it. Are we our thoughts? This is the most common and most persistent identification. We believe ourselves to be the voice in our minds. But if you can observe your thoughts, if you can witness them arising and dissolving, then by the fundamental logic of observation, you cannot be them. The observer is always distinct from the observed. Thoughts are clouds moving through the sky of awareness. You are not the clouds. You are the sky. Are we our emotions? We say, I am angry. I am joyful, fusing our identity with the emotional state of the moment. But emotion is a passing wave of energy. Yesterday's anger has dissolved. Last month's joy is now memory. Emotions are the weather moving through the space of awareness. They shift constantly. But the awareness that notices both the storm and the calm remains. You are not the weather. You are the space in which weather occurs. Are we our roles and our stories? We identify with the characters we inhabit: parent, professional, citizen, survivor. We identify with the narrative we have constructed about ourselves. But these are garments placed upon something that existed before them. The consciousness that experienced childhood 40 years ago is the identical consciousness reading these words now. The characters have evolved. The awareness animating them has not changed in its fundamental nature. When this deconstruction is pursued with genuine rigor, When we refuse to identify with everything that is observable and impermanent, what remains? At first, the logical mind may experience something like panic. It appears that we are moving toward emptiness, toward annihilation. In one sense, we are. But it is not a void of destruction. It is a fertile void, the silence from which all music is born. What remains is pure consciousness, the simple, luminous, unadorned feeling of existing, the presence of the I am, before any addition, any qualification, any story. Not I am this, not I am that, simply I am. This is the seventh level, the direct recognition of your true nature as the awareness that has been present through every experience, every stage, every floor of the journey. And this state carries several unmistakable qualities. It is formless and not subject to time. Pure consciousness has no physical form, no age, no geographical location. It was not born when your body was born. The consciousness that looks through your eyes now is the same consciousness that looked through the eyes of the child you once were, amazed, wide open, encountering the world for the first time. It is the only constant in a life composed entirely of change. It is the immutable surface upon which the moving image of your existence is projected. Its inherent nature is peace. The undisturbed quality of pure consciousness, when it is not actively identified with the drama of thought and emotion, is a deep, unconditional peace. Not a peace you must construct or earn, a peace you uncover, recognizing that it has been present beneath the noise the entire time. When you stop creating conflict with the present moment, the peace that is your nature becomes accessible. It was never absent, it was only obscured. And it is the source from which creation itself originates. Pure consciousness, this I am, is not a passive observer with no creative function. It is the very substance of reality itself, the quantum field of infinite potential, the light of the projector from which the entire movie of your experience is cast. When you identify with the wave, the personality, the ego, the story, you experience yourself as small, separate, and at the mercy of forces beyond your control. When you remember your true identity as the ocean, as consciousness itself, you reclaim an inherent creative power that no external circumstance can remove. To live from the seventh level is not to become detached from human experience. It is to inhabit it for the first time completely. A problem, seen from the perspective of the silent witness, is not a problem. It is a situation met not with the anxious resistance of the ego, but with the calm intelligence of the self. The energy that was once consumed by worry is liberated for genuine resolution. The fear of annihilation, the ego's deepest and most governing terror, loses its grip. When you have recognized that your essential identity is not the wave, but the ocean, the transience of form no longer generates existential dread. The body, the personality, the particular configuration of this life, all of it is understood as temporary. But the consciousness you are is not. This recognition does not produce recklessness. It produces a quiet, pervasive courage, freedom to live more fully, to love without the perpetual contraction of self-protection, to express your truth without the paralyzing fear of loss. The central practice of the sage is the I Am meditation. Not a meditation aimed at calming the mind, a goal that arises from conflict. A meditation aimed at remembering the truth of what you already are. In silence, the initiate closes his eyes and with each inhalation gently introduces the internal syllable, I. With each exhalation, the syllable, am. Not, I am strong, not, I am peaceful. Simply, I am. He allows his attention to rest in this bare, naked feeling of existing, the awareness that is present before any label, before any story. This is home. And meditation, practiced this way, is the daily act of returning. When, throughout the day, the old habit of identification attempts to arise, when a wave of emotion or a cascade of thought tries to define what he is, the sage employs the inquiry of the great teacher, Ramana Maharshi. He asks inwardly, with genuine curiosity, who is aware of this? The question does not seek an intellectual answer. It is a pointer. Its only function is to redirect attention from the content, the anger, the fear, the thought, to the awareness that is observing it. This simple act of reorientation, practiced repeatedly, becomes the fastest and most reliable return to the ground of the self.
Chapter 8 through 10. The Workshop, the Lighthouse, and Living at the Peak. With the wisdom of all 7 levels now available as your foundation, we descend from the summit of contemplation and enter the practical domain of conscious creation. The master of inner state begins not with external strategy, but with 3 preparatory disciplines: centering, purification, and attunement. Centering is the act of anchoring consciousness in the calm eye of the internal hurricane. Using deliberate breath, particularly the physiological sigh, to shift the nervous system from reactive activation toward receptive presence. Purification is the honest examination of the emotional climate within, transmuting accumulated resentments and current emotional turbulence through radical forgiveness and real-time alchemy, meeting difficult emotions with recognition, acceptance, curious investigation, and self-compassion, rather than suppression or dramatization. And attunement is the deliberate elevation of one's inner frequency through gratitude. Total, unfiltered, generous gratitude, flooding the nervous system with the chemistry of abundance and tuning the entire system toward reception. From that prepared inner state, the art of deliberate projection becomes available. The conscious creator works with 2 great instruments. The first is the decree, the spoken word as a precise command to the subconscious. He does not recite generic affirmations. He forges his declarations from the actual material of his own soul, anchored in the I am, spoken aloud to his own reflection in the mirror,
not to convince himself, but to remind himself of the truth he has chosen. The second instrument is visualization, not the anxious rehearsal of effort and process, but the vivid, multi-sensory inhabiting of the fulfilled reality. He lives in the final scene. He feels the emotion of arrival. He allows his nervous system to experience the new reality as familiar before it has manifested in form. The lighthouse effect is the natural consequence of having done this inner work. When your consciousness stabilizes at higher levels, you stop being simply an individual pursuing personal transformation. You become a field, a frequency that influences the environment around you without effort, without instruction, without any need for others to change according to your preferences. The lighthouse does not pursue the ships lost in the storm. It does not shout directions or judge those who ignore its beam. It tends its own flame with unshakable consistency. It radiates, and those who are ready find their way by its light. 3 qualities emanate from a genuinely stabilized consciousness: peace, clarity, and the living demonstration of possibility. The radiation of peace, a nervous system that has cultivated genuine inner stillness, creates a coherent electromagnetic field that other nervous systems can detect and are calmed by. The radiation of clarity, a mind operating from genuine purpose, generates a quality of focused coherence that helps those nearby organize their own scattered thinking. And the radiation of possibility. A life being lived from the higher levels is the most powerful argument available that another way is genuinely accessible. Not preached, embodied. To live at the peak of consciousness is to carry all 7 levels as an integrated wholeness. The responsibility of the awakened victim, the recognition that you are the author of your experience. The discipline of the warrior, applied now to the mastery of inner states rather than external territory. The strategic intelligence of the achiever, directed now by soul rather than ego. The clarity of intention, the compass that aligns each day with genuine purpose. The trust of flow, the capacity to collaborate with what is larger rather than control what is not. The compassion of unity, the recognition of the self in the face of every other. And the unshakable ground of being, the silent certainty of who you are beneath every role and every story. This integration is not a static achievement. It is a living practice, expressed through 3 jewels. Effortless action, the capacity to respond to each moment from genuine inner stillness rather than from anxious ego planning. Allowing the right response to arise rather than forcing it into existence. Unconditional peace, the discovery of a stability that does not depend on external circumstances being favorable, because the identity is no longer tethered to outcomes. And divine play, the recognition that existence itself is the creative expression of an intelligence that operates from joy, not gravity, and that your participation in it, when lived from this depth, becomes the same. The final and truly forbidden secret of this entire journey is this. The goal was never to permanently occupy the uppermost floor. The secret is that every level of consciousness exists within you, right now, simultaneously, available. Mastery is not the achievement of a fixed, elevated state. It is the cultivated capacity to visit any level with awareness, to choose consciously from which floor you will respond to any given moment, and to integrate the gifts of each level into a coherent and complete human life. To know when the warrior's discipline is what the moment requires, when the achiever's precision serves the larger purpose, when the mystic's surrender is the most powerful available response. Your practice from this moment forward is a single question, to be carried into every moment of genuine choice. From what level of consciousness do I choose to respond to this? Do not search for the end of the road. Fall deeply in love with the road itself. The expansion of consciousness is the infinite game the universe plays with itself. And you, fully, completely, without reservation, are the player. If this complete journey through the 7 levels has opened something real within you, if something in these hours has shifted the ground beneath your perception, we invite you to go deeper. Subscribe to Elite Success Audiobooks, where every recording is a map for those committed to genuine inner expansion. Leave a comment with your greatest insight from this journey. Share this audiobook with one person in your life who you sense is ready to begin their own ascent. And as you go, carry this with you. The staircase has always been there. You have always been capable of climbing it. The only thing that has ever been required is the decision to begin. Now leave the number 888 in the comments below. In the architecture of consciousness, 888 represents infinite abundance, the loop of energy that returns to itself expanded. Let this community witness the moment you recognized that the power was never outside of you, that it has been yours all along. Thank you for your time, for your openness, for the quiet courage it takes to explore the infinite landscapes of your own consciousness. The journey continues, and now, so do you. Consider what it would look like to take this seriously, not as a concept, but as a genuine operating principle in the actual texture of your actual days. It might look like this. Before you allow the external world to establish the frequency of your morning, before the notifications, before the news, before the accumulated weight of other people's urgency reaches you, you pause, you breathe, you ask a question that has no agenda attached to it. Not, what do I need to accomplish today? Not, what problems am I facing? But, who do I choose to be today? What quality of inner presence do I intend to bring to whatever this day contains? And then you carry that quality, not as a performance for others, but as a private internal orientation into the first conversation, the first decision, the first moment of friction that tests it. It might look like the practice of using your own emotional reactions as a map rather than a verdict. When blame arises, and it will arise, because the lower levels do not disappear. They simply lose their grip gradually over time. You pause long enough to recognize it not as a reasonable response to an unreasonable situation, but as a signal, a compass reading, an indicator of the floor you are currently on, and a quiet invitation to ask the question that belongs to the one above it. It might look like the gradual development of a new relationship with stillness, not the forced emptiness of a mind trying to silence itself, but the cultivated capacity to rest, even briefly, even imperfectly, in the awareness that is present beneath the noise of thought. The awareness that does not depend on circumstances being favorable in order to remain essentially intact. This is not a mystical achievement reserved for those who meditate for decades in dedicated silence. It is a capacity that begins to develop the moment you stop treating every thought as an urgent instruction and start recognizing some of them as simply weather, passing through the sky you are, rather than defining what the sky is. Now there is something worth addressing directly, something that tends to arise precisely here, in the space between receiving a map and making the decision to walk it. It is the voice that speaks from experience rather than from fear. The voice that says, "I have been in this place before. I have felt this exact quality of clarity before. I have made this kind of decision before. And I know, from the evidence of my own life, what tends to happen next." The inspiration fades. The old patterns return. Life continues largely as it was. And the gap between who I understand I could be and who I actually am in the ordinary moments remains. That voice is not your enemy. It is not lying to you. It is describing something that genuinely happened, a decision that was made in the light of an inspired moment and then left to sustain itself on inspiration alone, which is a fuel that burns bright and brief by nature. What it is not describing is an inevitable outcome. It is not describing who you are. It is describing the result of a particular kind of decision, the kind made once in a peak state and then not renewed. And there is another kind, the kind that is made quietly, without fanfare, in the morning before the day has given you any particular reason to feel elevated, and then made again the following morning and the one after that. This second kind does not feel dramatic. It does not produce an immediate sensation of transformation, but it compounds, slowly, unmistakably, in the direction of the person who asks the question. There is something else that deserves to be said. The journey through the 7 levels is not a journey that rewards the exceptional. It is not designed for those who have more time, more natural stillness, more fortunate circumstances, or a particular temperament suited to inner work. It unfolds for the person who is willing to begin with what they actually have, not the ideal conditions they are waiting for, and to continue from whatever floor they find themselves on after each inevitable drift back toward the familiar. The drift is not failure. It is part of the journey. Every time you find yourself back on a lower floor, reacting instead of choosing, blaming instead of inquiring, striving from fear instead of creating from wholeness, and you recognize it, and you pause, and you take even a single step back toward a higher level of possible.
Response. That recognition itself is the practice. That pause is the work. That one small step is not nothing. It is, in fact, precisely everything. Because the path of consciousness is not built through grand leaps made in extraordinary moments. It is built through an accumulation of small returns, each one quieter than the last, each one slightly more natural than the one before it. This is the truth that most teachings on consciousness obscure beneath the weight of their own grandeur. The actual work is ordinary. It happens in the moments between insights. It happens in the texture of a Tuesday afternoon when no one is watching, and nothing profound is occurring, and the familiar level is simply there, exerting its familiar pull. What you do in that moment, not what you understand, not what you intend, not what you feel inspired to do in your best states, but what you actually do with your attention in the unremarkable middle of an ordinary day, that is the substance of the practice. That is where the migration of consciousness actually occurs. There is a version of your life that looks almost identical to the one you are currently living on the surface. The same relationships, the same work, the same ordinary sequence of days, but that is experienced from an entirely different floor. In that version, the same challenges arrive, the same uncertainties present themselves. The same difficult people occupy the same positions in your landscape, but the internal response to all of it is different. Not because the external world has rearranged itself to accommodate your growth, but because the level from which you are meeting it has gradually shifted. Through the accumulation of countless unremarkable inner choices, each one invisible on its own, each one essential as part of the whole. The people who appear to move through life with genuine groundedness, the ones in whose presence something in you settles, something clarifies without knowing quite why, are not people for whom difficulty has been suspended. They are people who have developed a different relationship with it, who have practiced long enough and honestly enough, returning to a level of consciousness that does not interpret every challenge as evidence of failure, or every discomfort as a threat requiring immediate resolution. They have learned, not read, not understood, but learned through the slow repetition of actual practice, that the quality of the inner response is the one variable that remains genuinely available to them regardless of what the external world provides on any given day. That capacity is available to you, not as a prize awarded to the sufficiently disciplined or the naturally gifted, not as a destination that exists at some comfortable distance from where you currently stand. It is available as the natural unfolding of a decision that is made honestly and renewed consistently. A decision not to be perfect, not to ascend once and never descend, but to keep returning to the question, to the map, to the floor that is one step higher than the one the moment is trying to pull you toward, with the patient, unhurried commitment of someone who has understood that the quality of their inner world is worth the attention it requires. So leave the number 520 in the comments below. In the architecture of the awakening mind, 520 carries the frequency of transformation through the heart, the precise point where understanding descends from the intellect into lived experience and begins to actually move something real.
Leave it if something in this fourth chapter has migrated from your mind into your chest. Leave it if the decision, not the inspiration, not the feeling of the moment, but the quiet, renewable, unglamorous decision, is beginning to take root somewhere beneath all of that. And then do the one thing that no audiobook can do for you. Step into your day. And in the first moment, the familiar level tries to reassert itself. The first impulse toward blame. The first contraction around fear. The first reflex of proving your worth through doing. Pause. Return to the map. Choose the floor. Not because the outcome is assured. Not because the path ahead is without resistance, but because you have seen enough of the building now to know that a different view is genuinely possible. And because the version of yourself that inhabits that view, consistently, imperfectly, persistently, is worth every quiet, ordinary, unglamorous moment of inner work it takes to build. The journey does not end here. It begins here, as it always has, with a single, quiet, renewable decision to take one step up. But before you take that step, there is one final distinction worth carrying with you, because it is the one that determines whether the journey continues or quietly collapses back into memory. There is a difference between being inspired by an idea and being transformed by it. Inspiration is what you feel right now, this elevated, expanded quality of awareness in which the higher floors feel genuinely accessible, and the distance between where you are and where you could be seems traversable. Inspiration is real. It is valuable. It is the necessary spark. But inspiration is not identity, and identity is the only thing that actually changes a life. Identity is what remains after the inspiration has passed. It is the story you carry about who you are, not the aspirational version, not the version you perform for others, but the deep, often unexamined version that governs how you actually behave when no one is watching and nothing is at stake, and you are simply navigating a Tuesday. The victim does not think of herself as a victim. She simply experiences the world as something that happens to her, as naturally and unremarkably as breathing. The warrior does not notice his compulsion to struggle. He experiences it as discipline, as strength, as the obvious, correct response to the obstacles life presents. Identity operates beneath the level of deliberate thought. It is the water you swim in, not the fish you observe. This is why the journey through the 7 levels is not ultimately about understanding them. It is about allowing them to gradually become your new water. About spending enough time on a higher floor, not in theory, not in the elevated moments of insight, but in the practical, imperfect, daily returning, that it begins to feel not like an achievement, but like a memory, like home, like the place you naturally return to rather than the place you occasionally manage to visit. That shift does not happen on a schedule. It does not respond to pressure or urgency or the performance of effort. It unfolds at the pace of genuine practice, which is to say, at the pace of your actual willingness to keep returning. Not just on the days when returning feels easy, but on the days when the familiar floor is loud and the higher one feels distant, and the gap between what you understand and what you are living feels uncomfortably wide. On those days, and they will come because they are part of every genuine journey of inner development without exception, the most powerful thing you can do is the simplest. You do not need to generate inspiration. You do not need to feel elevated. You do not need to access any state beyond the one you are currently in. You simply need to remember the map. You need to ask the question, from what level of consciousness am I choosing to respond to this? And then take one step, even an imperfect, uncertain, unglamorous step, in the direction of the answer you actually want to be living. That one step is not nothing. In the economy of consciousness, it is everything. It is the practice. It is the work. It is the irreplaceable, unremarkable, absolutely essential act of choosing, again and again and again, the floor you are willing to inhabit. You have the map now. You have always had the capacity. The only remaining ingredient, the only thing that has ever been required, is the quiet, daily, renewable decision to use both.